Welcome to Moving Forward, conversations on culture, identity, healing, and hope. I'm your host, Linda Anderson, and I created this podcast as a space for real, heartfelt conversations with people who are reflecting, evolving, and boldly stepping into what's next. This podcast was born out of my own journey through seasons of loss, transition, and transformation, and my belief that healing happens when we come together to share our stories. My hope is that these conversations will inspire you to pause, reflect, and find courage as you move forward in your own life. Today, I am joined by Jason Muñiz, Site Director of the UC Berkeley History Social Science Project. Since taking on this role in fall of 2023, Jason has been at the forefront of expanding ethnic studies education. His leadership has guided professional development for teachers, administrators, and he's supported educators of multilingual and newcomer students and helped bring UC Berkeley's rich ethnic studies resources into high schools. With a background as a classroom educator in South Florida and East Oakland, Jason has lived and worked at the intersection of culture, identity, and history, and has been a champion for bringing those stories into the classroom. Jason, I am so excited to have you here today to talk about your journey, your vision, and the way ethnic studies can help us move forward together. Thank you for being here.
I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for asking me to join you.
So on that, let's get started with some questions for you. I can't wait for this conversation. So Jason, your path from teaching in South Florida and East Oakland to leading UC Berkeley History Social Science Project is definitely remarkable. And I know listeners are excited to learn about your story, but how has your own identity and background shaped the way you approach education and leadership?
Great question. I think as a true practitioner of ethnic studies, anytime that you're asking about my identity, my background, it's probably important for me to acknowledge here that identity is multiple. There are multiple kinds of identities, and they all intersect. And so, I guess to answer your question, I'm going to probably just choose like one real identity to sort of expand upon and answer your question with using that lens. And I think the identity that I will choose among the many is I'm the son of two educators. I'm a lot of different things. I'm a cis hetero male Latina from Puerto Rico background, New York City resident or born and bred, but the identity that kind of has informed my approach to education and leadership is the fact that both my parents were in education, both of them were administrators. When I was younger, I was convinced that I would be doing any kind of work but education. And so inevitably, that's of course the field that I ended up finding myself in and succeeding in. But that path was really led by the fact that it was a safe and secure place that I knew that the work would give me and provide me an opportunity to do something with my life that provided meaning, as opposed to some other kind of work that was just a job. This was something that felt like it meant something more than just a regular 9 to 5 thing that you do for a paycheck. So my parents were definitely very influential in that, and I started getting into the classroom when they were living in Florida. I took the opportunity to begin my work in South Florida at a middle school. I was a middle school teacher first at a couple different middle schools in Fort Lauderdale. Those communities taught me a lot about working with different folks and supporting different communities that I wasn't necessarily that familiar with. I didn't know a whole lot about Haitian American communities, and I learned over those years how to really work with those communities and make myself an asset to the families that needed as much support as they could. And I brought those ideas and that sort of energy with me when I moved to California with my partner Heather. And I became an educator in Oakland Unified School District, and I spent the rest of my career in the classroom as an educator at Fremont High School, which is not in the city of Fremont, but is actually in East Oakland, and in Fremont High School, which is in Fruitville. That community taught me so much and taught me how to be a leader, taught me how to teach ethnic studies, and taught me how to care about a community in a way that I wasn't from, but in a way that I was surprised that I had the capacity to do. And so that journey was just a lot of different places, a lot of different situations, but a lot of people that were able to touch and influence me and give me some inspiration about how to be a better educator and leader. And all that was really set off by the identity of being a son of two educators.
I appreciate all the information you gave because what this podcast is about moving forward with different parts of, as you go through your journey of life, and you've definitely shared quite a bit with us. I do want to tell you a little commonality that we have that I didn't know you did, worked in Fort Lauderdale. I was also worked in there many, I'm sure many years ago. So you talked about being in the classroom. When you reflect on those, what moments really confirmed for you the power of ethnic studies in transforming how students see themselves and others?
I think there's a lot of great moments and a lot of very impactful I guess incidents and things that occurred over the course of being a classroom teacher and a lot of different instructional moves. But I think the one that um, confirmed for me the power of the work of ethnic studies, the field of ethnic studies, was when the educators at the school and the school district that I was working at, Oakland, kind of had to live some of the ideals that we were espousing in ethnic studies classrooms. In 2019, there was a labor strike in Oakland Unified School District, and at that point, I've been teaching ethnic studies for a number of years in the district, and so many of the things that I had been teaching my students around, systems of oppression and resistance and fighting for the things that you believe in and caring for your community. We were put to the test of actually living up to those ideals and doing some of the things as educators that we were asking our students to consider doing for their own selves. And because I had been teaching the course, because I had been asking my students to take on these challenges and be brave in some of the things that they were facing, it allowed me to sort of it challenged me actually to do some of that same work and take on that initiative to lead in that space as well. And I think it was transformative in the sense that um, it's one thing to say something to your student, it's another thing to model that behavior for your students. And by the time that we were out there on picket lines and standing there and doing all the things that one would do in a protest, and doing some sort of like social movement, civic engagement, the students were there with us. They knew exactly what we were doing. They knew how to respond and be in support of us. And yeah, it was a great opportunity to practice what we preached.
Mhm. And student voice, and I appreciate that too. I'm a big advocate of student voice, so thank you for sharing that. And as I was a teacher myself before, and curriculum, we all have curriculum in front of us, but ethnic studies is more than just curriculum. It's about reclaiming stories and history. There's so much history with this. How do you define ethnic studies? And my big thing is, why do you believe it's so critical for this moment in our society?
So I love giving our definition for ethnic studies. Again, I worked in Oakland Unified School District. That was the first district where I got to be an ethnic studies educator. And in that community, we did a lot of planning and developing of the framework for ethnic studies. And it was one where we defined ethnic studies as a content and pedagogy that humanizes and empowers people by honoring their histories and specifically the histories of historically marginalized groups. And interdisciplinary study, but also interdisciplinary study that allows for critical analysis of a lot of the systems and the oppressive ways that the folks who have been historically marginalized have been existing or sort of been sort of surviving and enduring in our society, and kind of analyze the way that people like act in solidarity to sort of work to change their lives and change their communities. And it felt like um, we did that work very thoughtfully. We were learning as we went along as we were doing ethnic studies in Oakland. And the things that were most resonating with us as educators is every time we got the opportunity to give the mic, so to speak, to the students and have them tell their stories and have them explain their perspectives and the things that were so unique to their lived experiences, they ran with it. We would do autoethnographies. We do all kinds of different storytelling opportunities where students would be able to give their own narratives about like what they have experienced and what they're going to be facing growing up. And um, I think it's critical in this moment that young people have the capacity, the wherewithal, the agency to do that. That they know that their stories have value, that their experiences have meaning, and the people um, that are in their communities, are in their lives, that have helped them to grow up and help them become better people. They have the ability to recognize and empower and lift those voices up, even if the rest of the world may not. It's kind of in their hands to be able to do that on behalf of the people that care about them and that they care about. And I think in this particular moment, it's very useful for the young people in our society to practice caring and empathy towards one another, and ethnic studies
Mhm.
definitely fosters that.
Yeah. You, a big part of you too is you've led so many initiatives to bring UC Berkeley's ethnic studies resources, and that's a big thing, into the high schools and to high school teachers. But what impact do you hope that that access will have on classrooms and communities?
I really hope the impact of ethnic studies being broadly adopted in schools, and as you and your listeners may or may not know, in California, ethnic studies in 2019 was voted on AB 101, the legislation AB 101. Set up ethnic studies as a graduation requirement course, meaning that you can't finish high school, you can't graduate high school without having this on your transcript. Now, that's been challenged, and I'd be happy to discuss all the ways that that challenge has happened, and the that work of integrating ethnic studies has been resisted. But I think that the work of bringing ethnic studies into our classrooms, the hope was in those moments where the architects of those courses, that model curriculum, the original model curriculum for ethnic studies in California, and even some of the folks that worked on the subsequent, more contested versions. Ultimately, I think that the educators really wanted the people who were taking ethnic studies courses to have a different, more comprehensive view of the people and the communities that they live in, and be able to tell stories that weren't necessarily being told in instruction the way that it had been, being done in the past. And that kind of goes into the origins of ethnic studies. The whole nature of ethnic studies is it's an insurgent field that was created by student activists really in the late
Mm.
1960s, who wanted to have their stories told in classrooms and to be able to learn about themselves in a way that just wasn't being made available in the institutions of higher education that the young people were going to. And the whole point of this work is to make sure that those stories aren't ignored, that the education that we receive collectively isn't, exclusively Eurocentric, or just one with one particular mindset at the center of it, to the detriment of other perspectives. And I think the impact that ethnic studies should have, if done well, if done right, if done at all, would be to broaden that perspective and let people in different communities see and learn about other communities, and hopefully bridge some of those gaps and between us that seem to be so just divisive still.
Yeah, and I know you've done a lot of work with newcomers, and again, we're in California, newcomers and multilingual students. You've been very deeply involved in supporting teachers with working with newcomers and multilingual students. But how do you see ethnic studies intersecting with healing and belonging for those students?
I think healing and belonging looks a lot of different ways in a lot of different communities. So it's not just one sort of global way. Like, this is how we'll foster healing and community and belonging with a lot of different folks. The communities that California serves are so diverse and have so many different needs and so many different backgrounds, that healing and belonging looks, sounds, feels very different depending on the context in which the teachers are providing and the schools are providing instruction to students. And that's to say that healing and belonging may look different in a rural suburban neighborhood as opposed to an urban neighborhood, where there's a lot of different ethnic groups and folks of different language varieties and different entry points to the United States. So For the folks who are specifically newcomers, inevitably they are coming into more urban places like Oakland, like Richmond, like a lot of the places in the East Bay or in Southern California, Los Angeles, San Diego, those major points of entry. And in those places, healing and belonging really looks like being able to communicate with the students, and as teachers communicating with students and students communicating with each other in ways that they wouldn't necessarily have before, verbally, non-verbally, but also like what are we talking about to each other when we're having communication, when we're dealing with each other? What do we have to learn from each other that will serve us and be of value, um, to be in service of each other? I think that ethnic studies does sort of demand of students of ethnic studies to consider themselves and consider solidarity. How do we work together? And um, it's important for newcomers who are sort of bridging that language barrier, to have embedded in those understandings, language and the vocabulary about working with each other and being in community with your neighbors, and finding the pieces of language that will help you to understand folks who, I mean, you may not have ever had a chance to meet. And we have Central American students who are mom speakers. They don't even speak Spanish, but they're coming to America, and they're sitting in classrooms where there are Spanish speakers, but there's also people who speak Tagalog and Vietnamese and Arabic and Cantonese, and there's a lot of different places for students who have never had a whole lot of opportunity to meet people of different cultures to do
Mm.
so in this state, in our context. And with that rare opportunity, what do we do with it when we have this many folks all in conversation with each other? What will it mean for us to talk to each other, and what will we say? What value can we have in those connections that didn't exist before, but they exist here? So what can we do with that?
Mm. You said some major keywords to me at the end there, which is a rare opportunity and to have these conversations with each other. And I so appreciate that. And I know we're saying California, but this is throughout our country. And I'm hoping the listeners are understanding and hearing that. But can you share a story or an example of how culturally relevant history social science instruction, how has it opened the doors for multilingual learners?
So here's a great example of how it's opened the doors. Um, in my classroom, I taught again in Fremont High School. That's in Fruitvale, and if you know anything about the Bay Area and Fruitvale, it's one of the neighborhoods where there's a significant number of newcomer students. Like I would say, better than 50 to 60% of our student population were newcomers or within the first 3 years of being, people who are in the United States.
Mhm.
And with that much of a population, a lot of who are newcomers, a lot of the ideas, preconceived notions, misunderstandings about different kinds of communities of people, were brought with a lot of the students and their families from wherever they had come from. And that's just natural. If you're sheltered, if you're sort of siloed in one particular kind of community, the first time that you're interacting with others, you don't know how to take it.
Mhm.
Or you're moving into a place where this sort of understanding or this way of living is seen as more permissive, or sort of more understood as acceptable. That's something that's a challenge for students. And so one thing that I would see a lot of with many of my newcomer students who are from a lot of different places in the world, not just one, um, there was a lot of embedded in behaviors, embedded in ways of language, homophobia. There was for a lot of our students, and that's not to bash or be pejorative about any different groups or of newcomers. That was just something that culturally in a lot of different places, the degree to which queer lifestyles in the United States are accepted and appreciated and loved, and specifically in the Bay Area, was a bit of a surprise for some of those communities of students who were just like, that's something that no one even talks about where we're from. And so it was a rare opportunity for me um, to advocate for and to help to normalize for those students, um, what that worldview, what that perception was, and to not stigmatize it, to do what I could to be in support of those students who identified that way, many of whom were also amongst the groups of students who were like newcomers themselves, and had to sort of figure out how to negotiate that understanding of themselves in this context where the place where I'm from, that could never be ever discussed. But here it is, the opportunity to have a that sort of perception of self and that sort of understanding about who you are. There's possibility of it, but how does one seize that if you've never had the context of knowing what that is or what to do in that moment? And so, um, being an ethnic studies educator, embracing the idea of intersectional identity, that we're not just one thing, allowed for me as an educator to present a lot of different perspectives that were complex, nuanced, and not just one way to the students, and made space for ideas about self, about gender identity, about sexual identity, around racial and ethnic identity, intersecting with those that some students from where they were from may not have ever had a chance to talk about and go there and think on. And there's it's incremental, but you would see real change with students and seeing like the things that they were now able to understand. And while I'm a big fan of this worldview, like as you're a teacher, the the yield of what you embed or the yield of what you teach your students isn't necessarily going to be seen in the time that you teach them.
Hmm.
So I would teach in Oakland, we would teach ethnic studies to ninth graders. And by no means did I expect that the ninth graders, by the end of their ninth grade year, would have this great capacity for understanding and for being tolerant of each other. But the seeds were planted in ninth grade. And, I was in a weird position where I actually taught all the ninth graders at Fremont High School, so I would know all the kids at the school.
Mm.
And by the time that you would see them graduate, you would see like, oh, you're intellectually matured and you have emotional like intelligence to be able to understand and love and care about people across difference. That if I could introduce you to the 14-year-old you, the 18-year-old you would have a lot of things to say and a lot of wisdom to impart to that person. And that didn't happen all because of me, but I think that I had a role in
Hmm.
planting some of those seeds with the conversations that we fostered. And yeah, I was really proud of that, and it was noticeable.
Hmm. There's a couple words you said in there, which was seeds were planted, and I'm another big advocate of that because you don't know, you don't always see the what happens as a result of the seeds you were planting, and that leads into this next question that I had, and it's about your freedom mapping project. You invite students to connect with geography, history, and identity. But how do these projects like this cultivate hope? That's one big thing, and agency for these young people.
So that's a great question, and that is a labor of love, a pet project that the UC Berkeley History Social Science Project engages in with in partnership with our friends and partners in Southern California at UCLA, and then some of the different institutions statewide that have contributed, because it was truly an interdisciplinary project. And what I mean by that is the Freedom Mapping Project was one where we asked educators at the university level who would do professional development with students, like I would do, to all get together in a room and plan what is an interdisciplinary sort of framework for teaching that brings the ideas of ethnic studies together with a lot of different subject matters. And we arrived at one that would link physical education, science, and like health and science, math and ethnic studies and English language arts and some art all together into one great big project. It was a freedom mapping project, which also integrated geography. The idea of it was that students would get access to this tool called ArcGIS. It's a mapping tool that like geography students and anyone who's going to school doing that work are like, oh yeah, ArcGIS, we know it well. But it's one of those things that a lot of students at the middle or high school level certainly don't have a lot of access to. So we'd give the students access to this program, and they would do something called create a story map. Story maps allow you to interact with like physical maps that you can sort of graph and use data and sort of overlay data on. And we'd ask the students to, interrogate a piece of data that has to do with their community and a dominant narrative that connects with it. So a lot of students and we kind of like model for them the example of looking at like health data in their communities. So, for example, in our partners, the best work that we've seen in that was our partners in Southern California in Pacoima. They had an airport that was by the school, and there was a lot of like pollution from the airport, and the students there would do and like sort of use the data that was there around pollution to find out as much information about the pollution in their communities and sort of map, like, hey, this here's all this pollution that according to all this scientific data is coming to our communities, and we can sort of overlay that map of where this pollution is happening with redlining maps that shows like, hey, this is happening in specific communities where people of color have been sort of pushed into over the course of the generations since the 1930s and certainly before the HELOC did that work in the 1930s and earlier. So we asked the students to sort of think about that and ask them, all right, so if this is the perception of your community and this is the way that it's being interacted with by the those who have enough power to sort of place folks in positions and place their neighborhoods and sort of steer them to communities, there's a perception of who the people are that are living there um, that may or may not be correct, and you live there, so how would you correct that story? How would you tell your story to sort of to push back around the idea like, hey, like, those people can live in where it's polluted. That's okay. Those people are expendable. They can the harm that comes to them is not as important. So how would you push back against that narrative? And we would
Mhm.
use the tools of the story map, the freedom mapping project, to help the students tell that story by giving narratives about like the change makers and the things that are beautiful in their community, the people who have stories to tell about acts of resistance or acts of solidarity with one another, and have like the locations on the map of where's the person who did an action over here, and this is what they did, and be able to tell the stories using a sort of mapping tool. They have like a public art that sort of speaks to resistance. So the kids would take like these photos of like murals and different art
Mhm.
and different plays and different things that would happen in their community that spoke to a counter narrative that would resist the idea of their neighborhoods and their communities being not so important. And then the students would write it up and they'd give their analysis over what they've learned and the criticality that came from, hey, we took this action of finding out all this information to resist this story that was a dominant narrative about our community. What does it mean to sort of invoke those narratives, those new narratives, and spread that out and tell others about it? Which is really an essential part of ethnic studies that I think is often overlooked. It's the taking civic action and doing something with what you've learned. And
Mhm.
so all those were embedded in that freedom mapping project. And ultimately, like the project culminated in all things being equal, if you could dream the future for your community and change the resources that were available, change what was there, what would your dream community look like if you're in this community? Like,
Mhm.
how would you shift it to be something that would be in service to everyone? And so that last map that the students would make was not an actual map, it'd be more like a hypothetical sort of like a utopian sort of like freedom mapping idea. And that kind of ties into the language that we invoke for freedom mapping is Robin D.G. Kelly's freedom dreaming concept, where he would write about the idea that you can't make a better world happen unless you've imagined what that better world is going to look like,
Mhm.
which is a task and something that is uniquely that young people are uniquely qualified to do, to imagine a world that like that doesn't have the constraints or like the limitations that we as adults have foisted upon it. We see all the reasons why you can't do something, and young people inevitably aren't as tainted by that worldview of like all the
Mhm.
things that you can't do, and the imagination is much more powerful at their developmental stage in life. And so we let them run with that. If you can do anything, no,
Mhm.
all bets are off. Like, what would you do to make this place something that would represent who you are and serve everybody in a way that means something, and have that be the lasting piece that you've created and speak to. That's your form of resistance, to imagine something that like you are the only ones who can really imagine it to that level. It's your neighborhood, um, and we just found that to be just an incredibly empowering move at the end of that project for our students. Um, it wasn't as widely adopted because we did a pilot course for it in a couple of different places. In Pacoima in Southern California, we tried a pilot in San Jose at a continuation school, in Vallejo at another school, at a public school in Oakland. And there was some interest. The students who partook in that project enjoyed it, but it's one of those things that's it's hard logistically to do, a lot of moving parts. And so we still try our best to sort of incorporate a lot of the ethos, a lot of the teacher moves, and a lot of the enduring learnings
Mhm.
um, from that project and a lot of other pieces of work, and still trying to promote the freedom mapping project for all those who are interested in doing that work.
Mhm.
Like I said, it's a labor of love, and
Yeah.
if I could ask anything of a teacher who's trying to figure out a way to have a connection with their community that they're teaching, and they're an ethnic studies educator, and they want to integrate science, math, writing, arts, and ethnic
Mhm.
studies, historical narratives, yeah, I have a special place in my heart for that project, and I just felt like the idea that they would imagine what that place would be with all things considered and critical analysis of what people have to say, that empowers you. That's actual agency. Like that's the thing that no one can take away from you, is the thing that you can dream for your place, and the students would dream for their place, and like, whether you can accomplish what you've laid out as this dream or not. um the power of the youth in this case is that they have the capacity to dream, and we give them informed dreams, I guess.
As I'm listening to you too, and I know that listeners, we have educators on here, administrators. We also have people in the corporate world, and why not do this there too? I mean, why not have that mapping and story mapping and so on and dream, where their company or whoever, whatever is happening, whatever project they're working on to go as they work with each other too.
Yeah,
So,
I'm a big fan of like folks just, imagining something that may not necessarily be in evidence, and having that, like, what you've
yeah,
constructed as you've dreamed up as like something to be, that you aspire to. Um,
exactly.
that's not out of bounds for people in academia or in any sort of walk of life. It's just,
Right. No, I appreciate that. It got a lot of excitement into me here. So, how do you, though, personally, yourself personally, stay grounded and hopeful? Hopeful is a key word, while leading work that often challenges deeply ingrained narratives.
Yeah, it's hard to a lot of days remain hopeful when we are confronted by some of the realities and some of the ways that people can be unkind to each other. People, it's I don't need to explain to anybody who's listening to this all of the ways that the world is difficult right
Mhm.
now, perhaps more than ever. But I think what keeps me hopeful is having been in that classroom and having spoken to my students and having worked with them, and the realization for myself as I was teaching them that it's not my turn.
Mm.
Like, this is like the things that we're talking to the youth about. It's so they're prepared for their turn. They're up now. Like, and so like we're their tutors, we're their professors, we're their educators, we're their the people who guide them to think and consider things that they may not have considered. But at the end of the day, like, the hope lies in the fact for me that you know they're up next. Like the youth who are in the world right now, they're the ones who have the ultimate say about the next chapter of the world. And
Mhm.
the time of older folks like myself and you and other people who are adults in the world. um we're in the last gasp of our influence and our worldview. And so, for better or for worse, the the kids have got next. And when I speak to, and when I share ideas with, and when I present challenges to young people, um, I'm seldom disappointed by the way that they read those. Even if I don't agree with them, even if they don't agree with me, I think that the capacity for change and for tolerance for younger people is better than we imagine. The capacity for exerting energy to create change and do the work that's required is within them. A lot of people like will badmouth to me like, oh, these kids, and like, these kids are amazing. Like, you these kids are amazing. Like, these kids are
Mhm.
amazing. And I'm inspired by the way that they take action. I'm inspired by the way that they're still learning how to interact with the world and deal with each other. And um, that's once you sort of divorce yourself from the idea that they're going to do it just gracefully, that's us. That we imagine that it's going to be not messy. It's
Mhm.
going to be messy. It was messy for us. It continues to be messy for us. Look at the world. So it'll be messy for the kids too, but they're so up for the challenge. And yeah, I just think about the fact that like, yeah, it's not our turn.
Yeah.
Our turn is our turn is ending, and
Yeah.
I'm appreciative of the fact that the kids whose turn is up next, they got to have ethnic studies, many of them. They got to
Uh,
have
yeah.
conversations.
I thank you
Yeah.
so much for that because again, to the listeners, to you, is I am a true advocate of student voice and just it's their turn and the wisdom that you bring and that we all bring that we've traveled our story and we're still doing our story, but it's their turn and it's their and how can we help them? So on that note, Jason, as we wrap up, what message or piece of advice would you like to leave with educators, students, or community members who are working to advance ethnic studies and create, here's the ending part though, and create a more inclusive learning space?
Mm. So I think that one of the biggest challenges that comes with being an ethnic studies educator, especially an educator who's never taught ethnic studies, but even if you have, I think one of the things that's just a challenge in doing this work is making space for you as the adult in the space to be vulnerable,
Mm,
to accept that you're learning and to communicate that with your students and say like I I don't have the answers to some of the questions that you're posing, and for right now that's got to be okay, and I'm not a perfect person who's going to have all the right answers and say all the right things, and I will trip and I will say, and informed by my lived experiences, I'm gonna mess up, and so will you. And I think that as an educator, sometimes we feel like we need to be like the masters of the content. We need to be we need to be the experts
mm,
on something. And this is ethnic studies is about appreciating the fact that there's difference amongst us, that we can't know everyone's story, that there's so much diversity and so much broad understanding of who people are in ways that we can never truly understand. Even if you're the same ethnic and racial and sexual identity, and as my students, they're teenagers and I'm a grown man, so no matter what, even if we shared 25 different things in common identity wise, at the end of the day, I'm not 16. So like you have like
mhm.
your worldview is going to be so just monumentally different, and as an educator, to let that go, to 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 model for students what it is to liberate yourself from the guilt of not having all the answers, and say, well, let's how do we figure out, how do we develop, how do we construct meaning and answers together. um it relinquishes a lot of the things that we're taught as teachers, the things we're taught as adults, as we're talking to young people, like we should know, and we're imparting this wisdom. And yeah, the ability to be vulnerable, that's the advice that I want to give teachers. Be vulnerable, like let them get to the point where you can say I don't know, or I don't understand, or I
Mhm.
want to do better, or I'm learning, or I'm sorry. Oh my God,
Yeah.
the nerve sometimes that it takes for teachers to tell a young person, "I'm sorry, I made that
Mhm.
mistake, and I'm going to need to repair that harm in this experience," or "I'm sorry, I don't have that lived experience, so I just don't know what it is that you're saying, and if I said something that landed the wrong way or created harm,
Mhm.
if you authentically didn't mean to do that sort of thing, then you know, the
Mhm.
the vulnerability to say that to a student and to students, and apologize and then work authentically to do better. um, it's a different mindset for a teacher. You're a different kind of teacher, but also if you can master that as a practice, the upside of it is the students now know what it looks like for an adult to do that.
So true. Yeah. The word again, vulnerable, and then authentic. I think I heard you say that too. And authenticity is so important, as we do, as adults, we do guide these students. But I'm again even thinking of in a corporate world, just to have our lens open. You kept saying the mindset. Well, definitely, we hear the buzz, the growth mindset, but having that and and be vulnerable that yes, we've lived our life or we've lived lives and we have our wisdom, but other people are bringing other things to the table. So to listen to what they have to say too. So
I think that that's part of a growth mindset is us
yeah,
to go and be accepting of that which we
absolutely. Well, Jason, I can't thank you enough for sharing what you've shared today, your vision, your passion. I can hear the passion in your voice. Your work reminds us all that ethnic studies is not just about the past. It's about creating a more just and inclusive future. So by centering culture, identity, and healing in the classroom, you are giving young people the tools they need to move forward with hope. And to our listeners at the end here, I'd like to invite you to learn more about Jason's work through the UC Berkeley History Social Science Project and the Freedom Mapping Project, which he shared, which I kind of want to go back in the classroom. And again, to everybody, as always, may we continue moving forward together in conversations on culture, identity, and healing and hope. Jason, thank you so much. I truly appreciate it.
So welcome. Thank you for having me.